Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Backlot Banter movie review. It's been a while, but we are back for the movie event of the year. Maybe sans Top Gun Maverick, but Avatar: The Way of Water is now out. James Cameron hasn't made a movie in 13 years, and I'm, of course, joined by my co-host who just couldn't wait to return to Pandora, Tanner Dykstra. And we're talking about Avatar: The Way of Water. It's finally here. We are big Avatar fans when we got to see the re-release just a couple months ago, and stop doing Navi actions. We're here to talk about a movie. Calm down. Tanner, we're here to talk about Avatar. And if you want to talk to us about Avatar, you can join our Discord. The link is top description. And while you're down there, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, leave a comment about your thoughts on Avatar: The Way of Water. Are you excited? Did you already see it? You probably did. This movie's making $1 billion freaking dollars. Tanner, give me your thoughts on Avatar: The Way of Water.
Tucker, I was very excited, as the world was, for Avatar: The Way of Water. 13 years later, Jim Cameron returning to the director's chair, finally, to make the sequel to his epic Avatar from 2009. And I feel like the thing that's really overbearing my thoughts on the film are the technical choices that James Cameron makes. And of course, we'll get into those. But I think past that is the story and the world of Pandora. And it is as good as ever, I feel, in this. It is hampered somewhat by again those visual choices, but the design is all there. James Cameron, I think, took the complaints of that people had from Avatar 2009 about the basic, maybe unemotional story that some people felt that film had, and really just poured emotion, poured the themes of family and father and son and protecting each other. This family is our fortress kind of thing. He poured that into this movie, and what does it mean to adapt to a new world, to live with among a new people? He poured it all into this movie, and I really enjoyed it. But there's just there's those choices that are holding me back from thinking this is as good as the first.
Yeah, I think at first blush, I like the first one more, probably because it was more surprising. Learning about the idea of being put into the Na'vi bodies and the unobtainium and all these concepts of Pandora that we had to be introduced to were really fresh and fascinating with that first movie. But that was also a big complaint that people have with that first movie. Is like it feels like they're doing God, what's the word? Exposition. Feels like they're doing exposition for over 2.5 hours. And that's not a problem with this film because we had that first movie to set up. So now what we have is maybe not as fresh and as fascinating to be introduced to the world of Pandora, but much more character focused. And so I do think that with a couple of rewatches, I'd like to see this again on the big screen. I think this is going to become a film that I rewatch somewhat consistently, maybe more consistently than I do most movies. I think it could edge out the first one because I do think it is a better written film. It is more technically impressive, and I think that the world is equally as creative, but speaks to me on a more personal level because I'm much more of a marine biology fan than I am a tree biology. I do. I love fishies, and there's a lot of fishies in this movie, and there's some of the best fishies I've ever seen. And so they're on par. I think the first one still edges it out a little bit for me, but I'm so invested in this world now because they've established characters that I care about. And that's what we're going to be spending the majority of our discussion here because that's what this movie spends the majority of its time on.
Yeah. Okay, so Tucker, you want to start out talking about characters, about story here. I can respect that, and I agree. I think that's where we should start out because, as I said, my main complaint is with the technical choices, but we'll get to that in a moment.
Sure.
So where should we start with these characters here? Obviously, I think what's most surprising to me about the narrative focus of this film is that it's not a Jake Sully and the Teary film.
No.
It is about the Sully clan, more specifically Jake Sully's children, and even more specifically his sons, I would say, are the main focus. And Kiri, who is the child of Sigourney Weaver's Avatar, which is the conception is a mystery, as they say in this film. Like, I wonder what we'll find out in future films. But yeah, it is really a story about them, and I think that is a strength because we get introduced to these new characters who are half-breeds, as some of the other Na'vi call them derogatorily. They are the children of human avatar hybrids, and thusly they have to explore the world as that. But then, of course, they are the children of basically a chosen one in this world, and what does fate have in store for them? And this film really starts planting the seeds of where the rest of this saga will go.
Yeah.
And I think that is a mark of a good, first step in the rest of this Avatar saga. Is I'm so excited to see what happens to these characters down the road.
Yeah. And I think that's the strength of the breadth of the cast of this film and the fact that almost none of them go overlooked. Took is a child, so she's
Yeah.
not she's not given like a ton of emotional weight, but she's a child and we love her and she's cute and
Uh-huh.
I love her. But Kiri and Loak in particular are fascinating characters. And you
Yeah.
throw Spider in there and you throw Neteyam in there, and I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, this is a group that not only I find fascinating because they have much more distinct personalities than anyone else did in that first movie. You talk about Jake Sully, and he's kind of just maybe a white saviory character. Maybe he's just kind of like a meathead guy who's like
Jarhead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
jarhead getting into the culture of the Navi. There were pretty simple characters in the first one. I think that is upended here because not only do I care a lot about the family, but I care a lot more about Jake Sully. I think that Sam Worthington gives a much better performance here.
Hmm.
That's another huge criticism of the first one. He fully embodies Jake Sully here as not only a heroic guy who's really good at combat and has leadership skills, but is transferring these leadership skills to being a father. And that fatherhood side and his emotional connection to his children is really what gives him an extra shade of depth.
Yeah, I think, and I said this in the beginning, a focus of this film is really male relationships, father
Yeah.
and son, particularly, with Loak and Neteyam and Jake,
Hmm.
but also, should we say it, Tucker?
Yes, we should.
Okay, Spider and Miles Quaritch,
Yeah.
Stephen Lang's character from the first one, who returns as a avatar in this
Yes.
film and is the primary antagonist of this film. It's about those father and son relationships and like the cross generational, but also in this case cross species
Yeah.
relationships that are formed here, and the complicated nature of that.
Absolutely.
Like especially with Miles and Quaritch, but also the strained relationship that particularly Loak and Jake have,
Yeah.
where Loak is the younger brother and he feels he has to live up to the expectations that Jake has for Neteyam, and how he
Hmm.
feels inferior to his older brother. But also he accepts the blame for a lot of the things that he does. He's honorable, just like his father is.
Hmm.
And I think Jake recognizes that, and that's what makes their relationship so interesting, especially because Jake, again, has narration over the course of this film,
Yeah.
and a
It's
lot of
not
it.
all the time, but it's
No,
it's consistent
it's
throughout.
sparser than the first film,
Yeah.
but yeah. And a recurring line he has there, I believe, at the beginning and at the end, is a father is a protector, and he is
Hmm.
very protective of his children,
Yeah.
especially Loak, who is I guess, the primary connection that Jake has
Hmm.
in this film, because Loak will be, I presume, the primary focus of Avatar 3,
Yeah.
Avatar the Tolkien writer, because of a relationship that he forms with a Tolkien in this
Yes.
film.
Yeah, and it's that connection and the new area of Pandora that we're able to explore that also, as I said earlier, is what might put this film over. And
Yeah.
it's the story that's told through that because we have this interesting group of characters that I'm already invested in on a base level because like, oh, they've got these dynamics, they've got this cross-generational, cross-species dynamic. But they're outcasts from that, and then they're out of their element. I would say like they're out of they're a fish out of water, but they're actually a fish in water.
Yeah,
In,
or cat
in
people
this,
in water.
sure, yeah. In this scenario, because they have to leave the mainland that they were from with the forest people as they're known. I don't know the specific names of the tribes
I
of the
think the
Navi.
water tribe is the Matakayam or something
Something
like
like that.
that.
Very close.
Yeah,
Yeah, Metkaina, something like that.
something like that.
And they have to go live with the Reef Tribe. And that Reef Tribe already, I think, is more developed and more interesting than anything we got from the characters in the first one, except for Neytiri, who was much more of a focus in that first film, which we'll
Uh-huh.
talk about a little bit here. But putting them fish out of water, fish in water, in this scenario where they not only have to get to know new people, but an entirely new way of life that it further connects them to this world, the ecosystems, and builds relationships in strained but interesting ways. I mean, we ostensibly get multiple sections in this film that's like, it's like a high school drama of kids fighting each other and having
Hmm.
quarrels and
Calling each other freaks, being outcast, stuff like
exactly.
that. Yeah.
And that is a more human, it's a more
Uh-huh.
personable way to connect us to a developing group of characters because Jake Sully's not a very relatable guy in the first one. That's the joke about Avatar. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, really? Jake Sully's one of your favorite characters? No, not really. But now that he has a family and we have these children who are going through things that we have gone through of
Uh-huh.
having quarrels and having crushes and learning to adapt to a new environment, these are so much more emotionally resonant of a way to tell a story about this group than they even really tried in that first movie.
Yeah. And Tucker, you brought up Natiri, and
Yes.
I was thinking about this because, as I said, this film is largely concerned with male relationships,
Yes.
father and son particularly, and unfortunately, that means that Neytiri takes a back seat,
She
a
does.
hard back seat in this film, and really, I kind of don't like that
Yeah.
personally because I understand what Jim is trying to do again with the male relationships, but if you have 3 hours and 10 minutes, you
There's
can do a
time.
little bit. There's time. There's
Yeah.
time, Jim. And she has interesting character traits and character conflicts introduced in this film.
Mm-hmm.
She is very hateful of the sky people, of humans,
Mm-hmm.
and by extension, she doesn't like her children playing with Spider, a
Yeah.
human child, the child of the man who is trying to kill her husband, is trying to murder her
And
people
who
and
she
conquer her
killed.
planet, and who she killed, of
Yeah.
course. Um, but that relationship is not focused upon in this film.
Mm-hmm.
Could be the focus of future films, but
Maybe.
I wanted some development here. There
Yeah.
are hints of it. There's a moment towards the end when Spider is watching Neytiri kill a bunch of humans, and you can kind of see on his face. And I like this moment because the actor for Spider isn't always great, but I think he's good in this moment.
Yeah.
You can see on his face he's like, oh, the mother of my best friends hates my species.
Yeah.
And you can see the hate coming across when she is murdering these guys, just absolutely going overkill on them.
By the way, there's
Uh,
action sequences in this movie. Spoiler alert.
yeah, spoiler alert. And yeah, I just wish that we had gotten more Neytiri, because even aside from that, her conflict with Jake is that she doesn't want to leave her people,
Yeah.
the mainland, the forest. And then he's just like, we have to do it for our family. And she's like, all right.
Yeah.
There's not much of a conflict there because I think Jim is so. He's like almost like stumbling over himself. He's stumbling over Neytiri's character
Yeah.
to get to the Reef Kingdom.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. I think Zoe Saldana has sort of opened up that she's like not crazy about doing big blockbuster films like this, and this could
Mm-hmm.
be a reason, is because her character gets severely paved over in
Yeah.
this, and will hopefully be a larger focus in future films.
Yeah, I certainly hope so because I agree that's probably one of my biggest criticisms of this film is the dynamic between Neytiri and Jake is everything to that first movie.
Yeah.
It is the movie. We like Pandora, but we love Pandora, but we're connected to it because of Jake Sully and Neytiri's relationship. But she doesn't even like there's sequences in here where you should be seeing her like training with the reef people and learning to ride the things, learning to fish, and we just don't. Like we see the kids learning, and we see Jake learning, and where the hell is Neytiri for like
Yeah.
25 minutes? It's very confusing, but I also do think that there are a lot of really interesting seeds planted here. Her dynamic with Kiri and her dynamic with
Yep.
Spider and her super overprotective aggression protecting her children are
Hmm.
all really interesting additions to her character. But they're unfortunately not the focus of this film. And I do think that there's potential for us to learn more about her and her dynamics with her children in the future because, as I said, I really like all of these characters. And Terry's a core part of that. And
Yeah.
her dynamic with her family is well realized. It's just not well developed in terms of time spent on her specifically. But I
Yeah.
do think that so two things I want to mention.
Okay.
Actually, no. Why don't we let's talk about the frame rate.
Okay.
Because
Let's do it.
I've been holding you off on that. I think we can go back into some other things because
Sure.
this is the negative for this film, at least for you.
Yeah, it really is because I don't like the 48 frames per second sections of this. It's
Yeah.
well over 50%. I would say 60 to 70% of this film is filmed in this manner, is presented in this manner. And I just don't like it. And I was trying to assign a reason to why I don't like it because I feel it's empty criticism to say I don't like it, and that's it. That's the end of the end of the thought there. And I think what I've come down to this is a justification that I've come across is it's particularly used in action sequences.
Yeah.
And the way James Cameron uses the camera in Avatar is very like guerrilla on the ground style, drawing
Yeah.
attention to the fact that there is a camera that is filming these events.
Yeah.
So or so be it. That being said, there's camera shake, there is zooms, there's things like that.
Yeah.
That's how he likes to film action sequences in this. And I don't think that that works with the 48 frames per second, because the point of using the camera like that is to make you feel like you are there, especially with the camera shake and stuff like that when you're close up. And human perception just doesn't happen at 48 frames per second. It feels wrong. It feels
Hmm.
different from the 24 frames per second, which feels more natural when we're watching a film. And I think that's why it doesn't work for me. On top of the fact that it feels like I'm watching a video game on a TV with motion smoothing on.
Yeah.
I think it cheapens the textures that James Cameron and the visual effects team work so hard on to perfect in this film. I think that, it cheapens the action. I'm like, oh, this feels like a video game. I also feel bad saying that like it feels like a video game, as if video games are lower forms of art than
Yeah.
film is. But when I'm going in watching a film that has been in production for over a decade,
Yeah.
it has hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and all these visual effects workers, and has the narrative weight of a film behind it and 3 to 5 films in front of it
We'll see. Yeah.
coming. I
1 to 5.
wonderful. We will see. We will see. I don't want to feel like I'm watching a Call of Duty cutscene.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand that. And that is also my biggest gripe with this film. But it's also something that, through my experience, became not an issue for me. Because I started off this film being jarred, switching between 24 and 48, not only between dialogue sequences and action sequences, but sometimes randomly shot for shot in dialogue sequences, randomly shot for shot in action sequences. You'll be watching a 48 frames per second section, and oh, this part's at 24. And for me, that jarring nature I had the same reaction to you. Like, oh, this is uncomfortable. I can't quite tell what's going on. But I kind of felt the opposite in that when it switched back to 24, I felt like I was watching them move too slowly and I wasn't getting the full experience. And I think I think what you're trying to say about the frame rate being different from what we perceive is not, it's true for films. We are used to films being at 24. Human perception is much more than 24 frames per second, which is why you can see 60 FPS in a game, the difference between 30 and 60. And I like that James Cameron tried something. I like that he went for 48 in some of this stuff. And I think that for some action sequences, especially when my mind got wrapped around it, I thought it looked great. But the problem is that it's not consistent. It's not only action and only the dialogue sequences. It's in between. It is inconsistent, and that makes it more obvious that it's happening. I wish that this movie was either totally 48 or totally 24, because your brain would have been easily able to adapt to 48 frames per second, that's all you were seeing for over 3 hours, and it wouldn't be an issue. But you have to reset your expectations like every other shot, because it's not consistent.
And I'll be the first, and I will admit that there were points where I was settling into it.
Yes.
But then I think it is the inconsistency that you're talking about. And when it switched back to 24, I'm like, oh, thank God it's 24. And then it would go back to 48. I'm like, God damn it, another 48 FPS section.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was talking, there's one like shot that replays in my brain every time I think about how much I hate the 48 FPS. It's in the final action sequence when like a smaller boat like crashes into a rock and explodes.
Yeah.
I'm like, that looks like Far Cry 3 to me. It looks like a Far Cry 3 cutscene.
Far Cry 3 wishes it looked that good. But
well, yes, I agree. But it just reminds me that like it just cheapens this fantastic action that James Cameron pours into the third act of this film.
Yeah.
He knows how to escalate, how to raise the stakes after 3 hours, how to pace out a film, and how to make you, how to get these fist-pumping moments out of you for nearly an hour at the end of this film. And then I am just pulled out of it anytime I see that 48 FPS.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that might not ever be something that is changed with this film. I don't know if it's possible for there to be a cut of this film that's either only in 24 or only in 48, or if they spruce it up somehow. Obviously, there were some shots that were a different frame rate in the re-release version. Am I remember that correctly?
I believe that is the case.
They were
Yes.
they were setting the seeds, trying to get you used to it.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit about those action sequences because that's another place where this film drastically differs from that first film. Is this is significantly less focused on action. There are, three, four, maybe five. They are not as large scale as the ones. They don't have the world ending gravitas of the what, not the world tree, but like the mother tree or whatever it is
Yeah.
in that first film falling down. That is, I think that blows anything in this film out of the water.
Yeah.
But what they change the focus from here is, instead of focusing on guys with guns tearing through a forest, this is a much more settled film. You are given much more longer stretches of time to adapt to the world and ecosystem of Pandora in this new area of the reef world that we're exploring. And that is a big payoff for me. I love the action in the first one. I love the spectacle that James Cameron is able
Hmm.
to produce in True Lies, in Titanic, in these films he's made. And the action sequences when they're here are great. But I actually think that shifting Avatar to the more world building, grounded, quote unquote, human, personable aspect is another reason why I think this film might be better for me than that first one, because spending so much time underwater and getting to know kind of what each of these different species of fish and birds and dinosaur looking creatures do, and how they interact with each other, and how they interact with the Na'vi, and how the colony of reef people that we spend a lot of the movie with, how they've adapted, and we get to
Yeah.
see their way of life and the way they fish and these weapons they
And
use,
their way of water.
and their relationship to the ecosystem and their houses and the
Yep.
architecture. Like, there's so much really quality, like some of the best quality world building and realization of CGI fish and characters that I've ever
Yes.
seen. I think done better in this film than that first one.
Yeah, and maybe it's just James Cameron having a passion for like underwater
Yes.
marine life,
Yeah.
and that's and things like that. But yeah, Tucker, I agree that that world that we are introduced to
Yeah.
in here, the islands, these hundreds of islands that are all interconnected that we hear about, is astonishing.
Yeah.
I love every
I'm getting
underwater sequence.
I'm getting
Yeah,
goosebumps thinking about it.
he's getting goosebumps.
Holy shit, they're all the way up my arm. Oh my god.
But yeah, it's the moments of Jake's children and Jake and Natiri's children learning to ride the mounts that are of this world, like the smaller, more like lithe ones that anyone rides, and then like the warrior mounts that Jake
Yeah.
tries to ride. And notably not Natiri, because for whatever reason James Cameron is not concerned with that in this
Yeah.
film. But also, and I mentioned this earlier, I think that the crowning jewel of the new creatures and world building introduced here are the Tolkien.
Yeah.
These whale-like creatures that I'm just in love with these things. I was
Hmm.
thinking about that while I was thinking about this film, like, God, it's so cool that James Cameron put these things in here because we are so they're whale-like creatures, as I said, and we're so accustomed to hearing in our everyday lives like, oh, whales are like super smart creatures, they have communities and things like that, but at the end of the day they're just animals to us
Hmm.
still. But what James Cameron does here is that he takes that multiple degrees further. He's like, these creatures have interconnected, they have societies, they have philosophy, they
Hmm.
have music, they have real, genuine bonds with the people. Ronal and one of the Tolkien are soul sisters. They've known each
Yeah.
other since childhood. And I think that's just so beautiful and cool, especially when it's contrasted with the Tolkien hunts that the humans are
Yeah.
doing. And when you see the cruel, like way in which they talk about these things, he's like, "Oh yeah, they never fight back. What a bunch of dumb creatures or
Yeah.
whatever." And you know that that is not the case because earlier in the film they were like, they are so much more advanced that they realize that violence is you can't inflict violence upon other
Yeah.
creatures.
Yeah.
That
And
is
I
just
think that
an
ecosystem.
uncivilized way of living.
Yeah, absolutely. That is an understated but also kind of overstated element of the themes of the film, which I think are stronger than that first film, of the connection to environment that we got a good amount of in that first film, but it's more fleshed out here when they're not just riding on these like pterodactyl guys that like they have bonds with, but they still act and look like animals to us, but that
Hmm.
there is culture and that they have bonds and friendships, and when a Tolkien dies, that spurs the Reef Navi to go to war because it's like killing a member of their family. That we're all part of one ecosystem theme that is present in the first one. It's so much more foregrounded here, and much more naturally woven
Mm,
into the world that we learn about. And I really do love that.
yeah. So yeah, as Tucker mentioned, the Reef Kingdom ends up going to war over this killed Tolkien, which Quaritch significantly or purposefully says we should kill this one,
Yeah.
because it'll lure out Jake Sully, who I want revenge on. And the final action sequence of this takes up, how long do you think this? Is it like an hour, Tucker?
Unclear. But also, I think that's the great part about this movie. It's
Yeah.
so well paced that I don't know how long it is, and frankly, I do not care.
Yeah. It takes up a long time. There's like a day section and a night section. James Cameron goes back to his roots. He goes back to what he loves, and he sinks a ship
Yeah.
for the final action sequence. It's
It's
great. It's fantastic.
crazy.
People are getting off the ship. People are getting hauled back onto it by the bad guys and tied up, and they have
Yeah.
to do a knife fight, and they have to escape. After the ship has like turned upside down. It's very Titanic-y.
Yeah.
And yeah, I loved it. I think it's great. Aside from the 48 FPS stuff, which I already addressed,
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic. I think the character stakes are there. Neytiri actually gets to do something.
Yeah.
She gets this expression of like feminine, maternal rage as she
Yeah.
like just rips through like a dozen human people and avatars as well. Just
Mhm.
showing you how adept she is at battle that she didn't really get to express in the rest of the film. While Jake is trying to ride the warrior mounts and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I love the final action sequence of this. I love the rest of this movie as well.
Yeah, I think the action is very well used here. As I said, it's the less of a focus of this film, but when it's used, it feels really purposeful,
Hmm.
and it doesn't feel like, oh hey, here's the middle action sequence, here's the ending action. Of course, there is a big ending action sequence, but it
Hmm.
feels very naturally led up to, and the different phases of this fight are they make a lot of sense. It's a
Yeah,
very well paced and well integrated way to do action that doesn't feel like it's taking away from the character stuff because there's still so many moments of character development and dynamics and spoiler moments as we'll get to in a second
yeah.
in that last part. But Tanner, any final thoughts before you give our scores?
No, I think. Well, I will say that final thoughts. This is a very well paced. I was nervous about the 3 hours and 10 minutes,
Yeah,
but James Cameron
don't feel
knows
it.
how to pace things. How to pace things out. He knows how to escalate into the final action sequence. He knows what he's doing with these characters to an extent, I
Yeah.
hope, like with the Natiri issues that we talked about, with planting the seeds of Jake's children and how they will grow into future films. I personally believe that the titles of future films are references to his characters,
Mm,
particularly Lokan and Kiri,
yeah.
specifically. And yeah, I think this is a very, very good film with that visual technical hang up that I just can't get around. And I really hope that there's a 24 frame per second version of this that is available at some
Mhm.
point. And maybe I'll feel better about it because we are almost certainly going to be talking about this in a couple months for the Best Picture nominees.
Yes, and that's very exciting to me. I especially because I seem to have connected with this movie much more than your average Joe. I mean, people are loving this film, but all of our friends, I'm higher than them on
Yeah,
this, and I'm excited to see this movie again. It's such a cinematic spectacle of such an immense quality and artistship, craftsmanship. James
yeah.
Cameron has been working on this forever, and you really do feel the passion that he has for this world, the characters, and the spectacle that he's been waiting to deliver to us. And we've finally seen it, and I'm happy to report that I love this movie. For me,
Yeah.
it's going to get a 9.3 out of 10.
Oh, sure. For me, this is gonna get a 8.7 out of
There
10.
we go.
Sure. Yeah. God, I love James Cameron. He might give me the Pandora blues with this one. I love the Reef Kingdom. He introduces
Yeah.
all the world building, fantastic stuff, and the 48 FPS is less noticeable when they're swimming around
Yeah.
underwater. So
It,
that's another thumbs up for me. Quick spoiler stuff. Just so we can get our thoughts out about that. Two things I think are the big things. Neteyam is killed in this, and Spider ends up rescuing his father, the Avatar
his
of
father.
Quaritch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, First thing I kind of expected, especially because Neteyam was getting less characterization and
Yeah.
less things to do in this film than the other of the silly children. So I'm like, okay. And
And they're not
then
going to kill Took.
yeah, they're not gonna kill Duke, of course. And then with Spider saving Quaritch, I'm like, Okay. We'll see where this goes.
Yeah,
Because they're clearly planting this sort of like Spider is going to be this connective tissue, much like Jake was, I guess,
yeah,
between the Navi and the humans.
yeah.
And how will that, sort of intersect with Natiri's hate of the humans,
Hmm.
and her like discomfort with her children hanging out with Spider? We will see in the future. I have faith in James.
Yes, so do I, and I think that that's why I'm, Natam, I leaned over to you in the movie, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay if he dies. He was the worst one anyway.
Yeah.
And I still do feel that, but I do think that the emotional stakes of losing a child is something that I really am
Hmm.
interested to see how that plays into the family dynamic going to the future, because they just lost their core son, their oldest son, and now they have a new one with Spider, and I think that that dynamic and the group that we have built here is so fascinating that with these questions, I'm confident that they will be played into in even more interesting ways. And Quaritch returning in this film, in the body of an avatar, and with, I think, a more complex and nuanced characterization
Yeah.
with a character that he cares for in Spider, but he's kind of holding this back, and he has this connection to the Navi now that he never had, because he's been reborn as one of the enemy, and like that I
Yeah.
think makes him already so much more interesting than Quaritch was, the actual Quaritch was.
Yeah.
Quaritch Zero was in that
Yeah.
first film. So I'm glad he was saved, because I think there's real character development that could be
Yeah.
done with him, and maybe some bigger bad that he has to convince the people that he works with, the humans, to
Yeah.
team up with the Navi. Like there's so much they can do there, and the connections with Spider, through Spider, to the other rest of Jake Sully and the Navi people, because Spider's been raised with the
Yeah. They
Navi.
gotta they
He's
gotta
walking
team
around,
up.
he's jumping around, he's speaking their language. It's
He's Monkey
amazing.
Boy.
He's Monkey Boy.
Yeah. They gotta team up and defeat Edie Falco,
Yeah.
the other human general that was in this.
Yeah, that was pretty underwhelming.
Yep.
But I'm glad that Quaritch was a better villain in this, because villains were not the last movie's strong suit, and this was not this movie's strong suit either, but it was a stronger suit.
I agree. Very good stuff.
And with that, we will see you guys in 2 years when we watch Avatar 3, and we're not doing another movie review before then. Bye.
Bye.